Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you again for another Film Fanatic video. Thanks again to some of the new folks that have been subscribing, and also a couple of the new folks who have subscribed and have been commenting. That's I love. That's one part of doing this whole channel and doing this whole kind of little venture that I have here with doing these reviews. That's one of the things I really enjoy the most. I really love interacting with other folks out there who are, I don't know, fellow film fanatics. So yeah, hope everyone's doing good. It's Monday, and it's about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock actually. 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. This is actually the first day of my vacation, technically. I had Friday off of last week, but there was like a half a day. I started working last year part time at the Montessori school. It's a pretty amazing place. It's a private school, and they have a few different locations in Maine, and of course, like nationally. But there's a couple in Massachusetts and in Boston, and there's two locations here in Maine. There's one in Camden, Maine, which is a town that's very close by from here, where I used to work, and that's about 15 minutes away. And then there's one that opened, then a second location that opened about 5 years ago, or maybe give or take a year. Uh, a second location that opened up in Belfast, and the Belfast location is literally like 5 minutes from my house, so it's really awesome. And I started working there over. I started there the fall of last year, and I just work part time. I basically, work in the aftercare. I take care of little kids, and we basically just kind of hang out. There's like a little staff of us that take care of the kids, and basically hang out with them and watch them. They're all like young kids, and we hang out with them for a few hours every day, play games with them, do some activities, take them outside, and it's really great. And one of the reasons I love the schedule and somehow it all works is it's pretty awesome to be able to have that job, but it's like part time and it has a lot of flexibility. And the reason that I tried to make try to make this kind of situation work is I attempt to have a music career. So it's really flexible with having that kind of weird lifestyle, where I play gigs during the weekends sometimes, and then I also teach privately. I usually teach drum lessons. I have a few students that I teach during the week, and then I have rehearsals during the week that take up a pretty good amount of time, and just practicing and stuff. And so it's flexible. It's really great because it's flexible with that kind of that kind of a this kind of crazy lifestyle that I have. So it's been awesome. And Monday or Friday we had school was technically still in session, but I work just in the aftercare, so they had an early release on Friday, and the school was the kids were sent home around 11:30 on Friday, but I didn't have to go in. So technically today is like the first full day, but I did consider Friday to be the start of vacation. So yeah, so I have have a bunch of time off, a bunch of time this week. It's been funny. I did a whole show yesterday on my crazy experience of going to see one of my favorite bands of all time, Morbid Angel. And I saw them on Saturday, and I did a whole video on that, on the whole experience, and how um, it was crazy. It was totally nuts, and it was a little crazy, a little dangerous, but I kind of got through it, and it was, looking back at it, it was an experience I won't forget. I got main thing that happened was I did go in the mosh pit a few times because it was Morbid Angel after all, and I remember last week I'd been telling friends about the show for a while that I was going to this concert, and would come up here and there in conversation. And I don't know too many folks or too many friends. I only have one friend, and that's the friend that I went to the show with. My friend Sam Wydick, who's a really great dude. He's an awesome musician. He plays drums also, and he lives in Portland. And I've known Sam for a really long time, but the last like 2 or 3 years, we got to know each other more and more, to where we like became close, pretty close, and hanging out, and he's a great dude. But he's really the only guy that I know, only friend that I know, for the most part, with the exception of maybe one other person, but that I know that's into extreme metal. Most folks I know are not into it at all, like at least locally and stuff. So, it's funny. So I had been telling people about the show, and I remember one of my friends, I was at rehearsal with Electric Bonfire, and one of the guys in the band had asked me, so, when I told him like kind of the history that I have around Morbid Angel and how they're like, easily on my top five list. They're definitely my favorite like metal band, or extreme metal band. And I told him a little bit about who they are, and the, kind of their history. He had definitely had heard of them, but he's not really into he is into like Zeppelin when it comes to rock, and he was into early Van Halen. He was into early Iron Maiden, but that's kind of where it kind of ends as far as extreme music, and I love that stuff too. But I remember him telling me, him asking me, you think you're gonna go into the mosh pit? And I was like, well, I don't know. Part of me doesn't really want to do that now because it's dangerous and it's crazy. But then I also said, well, I kind of feel like part of me needs to do it just because, it's Morbid Angel, and they're it's a band I've been wanting to see for forever basically. And I told him about the history, how I discovered them when I was 11 years old, and it's been this is just this kind of very cool relationship to that band for years. And then I just kind of the last few years I got really back into them big time. And so I kind of had said to him, well, I kind of feel like I just need to do it. And even though part of me is like, no, I don't know if I, you know, really want to do that anymore, because it's you can get really fucked up and hurt and violent, and it can be really violent. Uh, and parts of it, and you can also get away with not getting hurt in the pits, in mosh pits, but generally it is what it is, and it's what you sign up for, so you can get severely messed up or survive. And but so I did a video on that whole experience, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience, but I got royally uh, destroyed in the pit, and I at first I was like, before I was gonna go in, before I actually ended up going into the mosh pit, I was like, I don't know. I was kind of reluctant, but then when Morbid came on, and especially when they started playing like midway, I just I just charged in there full on, and at first it was funny because they played a couple of songs that I love all their music, but they played a couple of songs that I kind of love more so, and at like I don't know the third or fourth song, I decided to go in, and I went into the mosh pit, and it was completely insane and intense, and I got thrashed all around, and it was a whirlwind. And then I took a little bit of a break because I was pretty tired, and then they played a song that is one of my favorites, and then I went full on into the mosh pit at that point, and that's where I got really messed up. I got hit really hard in my back, and I believe it was with a knee, and knocked the wind out of me, and I got super, super messed up. But so today uh, I've been in, it's getting a little bit better, but I've been in lots of pain. I got a heating pad, and I'm trying to take it easy. But it's been pretty rough. So I'm trying to get better and trying to heal back a little bit. So, but at the same time, it was worth it. You know, it was totally nuts. And I remember I was telling a couple of friends about the experience and what had happened and how crazy it was, and and they were like, well, it's probably time for your, you know, basically they were calling me an old man, and you know, it's probably your time is up to stop doing those kinds of things. And you know, I get that, totally get that, you know. And it's funny because most of the people at the show were about my age, like mid 40s to late 40s. But there were tons of like young kids. It was like a cool generational mix. There was like people, most of the folks there, I would say, were like in their mid to late 40s and then older. And then the rest of the percentage of the people that were there, I would say, were like, you know, super young, like in their maybe early 20s, you know, just legal drinking age kind of a thing. So it was a cool like mixture, you know. And I remember I had mentioned it in the video yesterday. I even saw like a father and son there, which was what I believe that they were father and son, and I thought that was super cool. And they, you know, so it was like a cool kind of generational thing. And I remember Steve Tucker, the singer from Morbid Angel, had commented during the show. He's like, "Wow, like there's tons of old schoolers here, like all the old school death metal heads." But then he was saying too, "Wow, I see lots of like young kids here," and he's like, "This is awesome. This is like, you know, passing of the guard, or passing of the torch, you know." So, and that it still kind of finds its way of, as a scene, it finds its way of just where it's gonna keep living on somehow. So it's pretty cool. Um, but you know, and again, when I got really messed up and I got dragged out of the show, and when all that craziness happened, you know, when I woke up and I saw like these two young guys, they were physically, I would say, they were more messed up than I was, but I got hit in the back, so you know, they got maybe a broken couple of broken bones or maybe a broken nose, but they were bleeding. I wasn't bleeding, but I got hit in the back, so that pain is going to be with me for a while. But, and I know obviously age is a factor, but it was still super fun. And I don't, you know, I might have gotten that part of my life. I might have gotten that kind of craziness out of my life, possibly for good, because don't really want to need to go through this again. But you know, hey, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So, but anyway, so today's show is going. I'm going back to doing some movie reviews. Again, one of the things I like to do with this channel is to try to, you know, mix things up and do some specialty shows like yesterday where I talked about, I did my first kind of concert review. And so, you know, music, films, all those things are totally interconnected with me all the time. So today's show is going to be on a classic. I find and I feel that this movie is a total classic, and that is the Manhunter. This is the story and movie that started off the whole franchise that is is known for basically the kickoff to Silence of the Lambs, one of the greatest horror films ever made. Silence of the Lambs, I feel I'm going to do a show on Silence of the Lambs probably after this show. Manhunter was the film that kind of started the whole thing. And I look at both movies, Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs, as definitely being horror films. They're obviously more on the, they're essentially films about serial killers, and they're more in the lines of like psychological horror. but I definitely consider them, overall full-on horror films. And I think I look at Silence of the Lambs as being, not only is that an amazing, just an incredible movie, just a masterpiece, but I think that that movie historically is really significant because I look at it as probably the only that I can think of. I could be wrong, but probably the only horror film in history that I consider to be a horror film that's that won Best Picture. It won Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor. Of course, Jonathan Demme directed it. Jodie Foster won an Oscar. Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar. It won all of it won every Academy award that year when it came out. And I again, like I said, I definitely consider, even though it's more of a psychological horror film, I definitely consider it to be, at the end of the day, uh, a classic horror movie. And historically, I think it's really the only movie that won all of those awards, in that genre. Because since then, there's been, obviously came out many, many, many years ago, and there's been lots of great horror films since then that maybe fit into more of a, um, less of a psychological horror but still horror films that are always bypassed by the awards ceremonies, and they're never ever really even acknowledged. So this movie was a real pivotal time, I think. Not only for horror films, but movies in general, and it's one of the greatest movies I think ever. But Manhunter for me is one of my favorites also. Uh, there's and it's funny, it's weird because the whole Silence of the Lambs thing, like, I consider it to be a franchise. There's quite a few movies in the franchise. First, there was Manhunter, based on the book, The Red Dragon, and there's a series of books, Silence of the Lambs, and then there was also the sequel that came out after that. There was also a remake of Manhunter called Red Dragon with Ray Fiennes, and then there was also a movie that was called, I believe it was called Hannibal, and it was based on, more or less, about Hannibal Lecter. And there was also a series that came out uh, based on Silence of the Lambs, and I think it was called Hannibal Lecter or Hannibal, which was a pretty awesome show. So there's a whole bunch of things connected to the franchise itself, which is kind of weird and crazy. Like, I'm always like, oh wait, it is, this whole thing is kind of a franchise, and I always kind of forget that. And I'd say Manhunter and easily Silence of the Lambs, of course, are the best. And I would say Silence of the Lambs is probably the greatest in the franchise. The rest of the films are not, I don't think, are very good. I think the sequel to Silence of the Lambs was a really big misstep by Ridley Scott. It kind of gets into the whole story of where Hannibal Lecter and Clarice, played by Jodie Foster's character, kind of basically fall in love, and it's really unbelievable and just too far fetched, and it's a little bit um, just kind of silly and ridiculous. I never really was a fan of that, and it was directed by Ridley Scott. That movie had a lot of acclaim, has some good elements in it, but it just, to me, the story evolved to where it was kind of ridiculous and just something too far fetched, too far removed from the original storyline. And Manhunter, the original, came out in 1986. It was directed by Michael Mann, starring William Peterson, the great and brilliant Brian Cox, who's, I think, one of the greatest character actors around, and of course Tom Noonan, who plays Francis Dolarhyde, the Red Dragon. I think it's Tom Noonan is another, just amazing actor. He But I think his role as Francis Dolarhyde, the Red Dragon, is one of the most frightening, portrayals of a serial killer on the big screen. I mean, he's truly frightening and menacing and scary, just amazing. He's just so great in it. And Kim Grice, Joan Allen is fantastic in it. Dennis Farina, another wonderful character actor. He plays Jack Crawford, who's like the head of the FBI. Stephen Lang is also in this film, and this film is wicked old school. It came out in 1986, and it was directed by Michael Mann. Who Michael Mann's a really prolific was a really prolific director. Made all kinds of interesting and cool movies. He made Heat in 1985 with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, which actually is a pretty good movie. It's got one of some. It's got some of the best action sequences in it. I think that around, but the movie itself is pretty good. It's a little bit long and a little bit long-winded at times, but I think it's a pretty solid movie. But it's kind of an epic kind of a film. Heat, yeah, and it's pretty long. And then another film he did with Tom Cruise called Collateral, which is actually a pretty awesome movie. That came out in 2004. You get to see Tom Cruise play a role where he's like this assassin and he's like this brutal killer, and you never I've never seen him in that kind of a role before, and he's pretty awesome. And then he also did a remake of Miami Vice. He also did the original TV show of Miami Vice, which is I always whenever I remember that I'm always like, wow, that's pretty funny. But he did a film version of that with Colin Farrell in 2006, and of course Manhunter in 1986, and he also did The Last of the Mohicans, which is an amazing movie that came out in 1992 with Daniel Day Lewis, which is an epic movie. I think that movie is just kind of a masterpiece. Really great, just a beautiful film. He did a film called Thief with James Caan in 1981. That's a really great movie too. He also did Public Enemies with Johnny Depp in 2009. He hasn't made a movie in a long time. I mean, he's about 80 now, but he has a long um, had a long, really prolific career. Made some really quality movies, and had a real has a real interesting. He's kind of known to have this real visual sense and visual style. Like when you see a Michael Mann film, you can tell right away. It just has a certain kind of look and a certain aesthetic. Everything's really popping at you visually, and it has a very everything has a very dramatic kind of appeal to it. And definitely, I think Michael Mann is one of those directors out there that definitely has a unique style. And any time, at least I find from my perspective, anytime I watch any of his films, I can tell it's like a Michael Mann film because of the production value, the way it's lit, the way the scenes are shot, the editing. A lot of his films kind of have this like slightly heightened reality to it, but and I don't have Manhunter on Blu-ray. I do need to get it at some point, but I have this really awesome collector's edition on DVD, which is really great, and it's got two discs on it. It's really great. It's a really awesome package. I've had this copy for a very long time, and there's basically there's like a theatrical version of it, and then there's also a TV version, which is weird. I remember this used to be on television. I think originally it was a television movie. So, but there's moments of this movie, especially around uh, the Red Dragon's character, played by Thomas Noonan. It's utterly terrifying. And this movie, I remember seeing this as a kid, and there were certain things about it that just really scared me, and it just really got under my nerves, and I found it to be like truly frightening at times. And it also has some of the coolest use of music. Famously has Iron Butterflies, Inagata Davida in it. and it's just so iconic. It's such an amazing sequence where they use that music and that song in this one scene, particularly around this climax and the climax in the movie. And now it's, it's always been etched in my memory ever since then. So now every time I hear that song Inagata Davida, I think of the Red Dragon like automatically. That happens a lot with certain songs, and certain films over the years where certain songs become synonymous with that movie, that particular movie, and for me, when I hear those songs, maybe just randomly somewhere, I it puts me right back in that place of, oh, that movie. I remember that was in that movie, so it makes me think of that film. So it's always interesting. It's always like a kind of a cool experience. And Iron Butterfly is definitely an example of that with Inagata Davida. It's just amazing. It's an amazing song and trippy as all hell. Super dark and weird, but now it's etched in my memory forever, and it's synonymous with this movie. But this is I think this is a really great movie. It's a little bit dated. I mean, it came out in 1986. I will say it has a little bit of a dated quality to it, but I still think the movie works. It's obviously from the 80s, and it might be dated. Like I like, again, most of the films I cover are from the 70s and 80s, and I find a lot of the times, at least in a weird way, from what I get from a lot of these, especially the exploitation films. Obviously, they're very, very dated and they're old by today's standards. But there's something about it where I don't really feel. I feel like they really hold up. And if they are dated, where you see it, well, like clearly this is like made in 1981, and it's got these references or whatnot to that period, and it makes it maybe cheesy or a little bit silly. I I feel like most of the time when I have that experience, especially around in the exploitation world, that it actually helps the movie and that it makes it dated, or it's dated but not in a bad way, and it's dated actually in kind of this cool way, which is kind of funny. With this, and then there are certain films that are dated, and it's kind of like it might be dated to a point of where it kind of makes you cringe a little bit. Certain films have that thing of where it's a weird balance, and it might be dated in a way of where it might hinder the movie or hinder the experience. So it's a fine balance, and I think that this movie is a little bit dated in kind of the wrong way. It just, I think it's because of the serious nature of the film, and that it's meant to be taken so seriously. That might be why. But that being said, I still think that this movie is awesome, and I still think overall this movie totally holds up. It's still a frightening movie. It's super suspenseful, amazing atmosphere. Some, like the cast that I mentioned in this film, it's they're just fantastic. The writing is really great, and I really think that this is second to Silence of the Lambs, like a close second. But a really awesome movie, and I do need to get this on Blu-ray at some point. But this edition's really great. It's actually in THX, which is awesome. So the sound is pretty amazing, and the quality is really awesome. But yeah, Manhunter, um, a great film. It's the old school version, so definitely check this out. If you're a big fan of Silence of the Lambs, which I don't know how you couldn't be, and if you've never seen, you might have seen the other films in the franchise, and the TV show is actually really good too. The other movies are not, they're pretty undercooked and they're pretty subpar. I think they don't lack the fire that Silence has or Manhunter. But if you haven't seen Manhunter, the original one, directed by Michael Mann, I highly recommend it. It's an awesome horror movie. It's super creepy and super well done. Amazing atmosphere. It's one of Michael Mann's best movies, I think, easily. So yeah, definitely check this out. So this is Jason Dean, and I'm going to sign off here. And if you like this page, please subscribe and like it, and keep the comments coming. I love interacting with other film fanatics out there in the World Wide Web. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.